Hello, everyone. Welcome back to class. So for this week's debate topic lecture, the topic will be on family. With the motion, this House would significantly increase the tax for the families with only one child. So the government will be asking families with only one kid to pay more money for the government. Okay, so let's look into the topic. Do you have a sibling? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But it is true that we see many families have siblings, especially when you're from an older generation. It was much more true because they used to have bigger families back then. But you also know that the families these days are getting smaller and smaller, and the young couples who marry these days don't even think about having children because they want to enjoy their life first. So you see that trends in families are changing really quickly from the traditional values. Now, normally it is okay, but for shrinking families, in terms of the economy, in terms of family, in terms of the whole countrywide, is it an issue or not? Well, a long time ago, of course, you had a very big family because most of the time people worked in farming or they worked in factories doing manual jobs. So, more children that the family has, it really means that there's more labor power and thus earn more money. It was also true that the medical system was really bad back in the day. So, if you have a small number of children, then they might likely catch a disease and they might die. So it was safe to have a lot of children. But it came to the point that a lot of countries were suffering from population explosion. So one country that I wanted to just show you as an example was China. So China had a tradition of having a large families, but then they realized that the population was going too fast, growing too fast, too rapidly. So they actually had a one-child policy, meaning that they made it into a law that families are only allowed to have one children. Now, obviously, for other countries, they also saw that even after the Industrial Revolution, for a lot of developed nations, which are rich nations, they saw that people were changing. They aren't having a lot of kids like before. Some people are saying two is enough, but then the young families are shrinking now. We see population growing to not growing, sorry. And for some countries like South Korea or Japan, the fertility rate is actually less than one. That means there are families that are growing to stop having children at all. So this means that, as you can see from the last picture, that families or society in a case where families don't have children is becoming a very aging society, meaning that there's lesser number of babies being born compared to the number of older people. So is this really an issue? Well, in an economic perspective, it could be an issue because if you think about how many people are available to sustain or support the older generation, if that young generation is shrinking fast, and it really means that the country might not be in a healthy state because a healthy country, healthy population should always have a healthy balance of young people and old people. Okay, so that comes to this solution. So the solution I want to talk about here is that should we significantly raise tax for the so families with only one child? So that would be the motion that we will talk about. Now, obviously, in most of the countries, if you already have a lot of children, then they lower down the tax for you. But we are taking this to a bit more extreme sense, meaning that if you are a family in a very aging society, and then the husband and the wife decide to have only one child or no child, then the government will say, well, you're not having any children to support our next generation, so I'm going to double or even triple your tax. So that families should actually think about having more children if they don't want to pay a lot of taxes. Okay, so that was the motion. So what do you think people would say to this? Like some people say yes to this because obviously children might grow up happier with more children. Now, if you have a sibling or if you're from a family with a lot of cousins, then obviously you know the benefit of having a family member always around you and growing up. Uh, Sometimes, and the studies do show that families with larger number of people are actually happier. And also, it is also true that because we need more people to work in an economy, to earn more money, to create more jobs, then obviously we need a lot of people. And that's why growing population is generally better for the economy. Lastly, it is also for the population balance. Places or countries like Japan or Korea, where we see a hyper growth in the old people population and pretty much no growth in a younger generation, when the people are the population demographics are imbalanced, then there's going to be a lot of issues like pension, where people want to retire, but there's not enough money for the government to support the old people because there's going to be so little working people, so they don't pay a lot of taxes. Or governments have to cut down welfare because with the aging population, then there's going to be increased spending in medical care, so or health insurance, for example. So the money that is used for other places might just dry out, and that's why it is extremely important to have a balanced population. And this motion or this solution should help because it will kind of trigger families to have more kids by default. Now let's think about no. Why should we say no? Obviously, the first thing is choices, that each and every family should have the right to choose how many children they should have. If the family decides that I don't want to have any children, that is their choice and that is their freedom. So governments cannot really say to the families that you should always have at least two children, because that is really against the freedom of choice. You can also say that children's in like if you're an only child, it doesn't mean that there is an issue, because there are also equal amount of studies that show even if you're an only child in the family, you can grow up to be perfect and competent leaders. So just saying that having more sibling is good is really just a myth. And also you can say industry is changing. Back in the days, we were farming, people had to work in the factories, but now a lot of these jobs are done by the robots. So maybe the future doesn't need a lot of people, but we need few skilled people who can really grow the economy through groundbreaking technologies like the artificial intelligence or robotics. That really sustains that yes, we can have economic growth even with lesser number of people, because the industry, the world is changing. Digitalization or remote working, for example, all of these mega trends that we see really requires people not to have a super large family. So let's look into some of the arguments for this debate. Now, if you're in the pro team, obviously you want to say, look, guys, in the status quo, especially for the rich nations or developing nations, we're seeing a trend where people are not having kids and the population is aging. We're not going to have enough people in the future, so we need to do something. And this is the best possible way. You can say families having at least two children will benefit the child, family, society, and the country. So first argument I can think of is that children will grow up better with a sibling. So you can also say, look, the reason why there's so much bullying these days, the reason why the children are so stressed out is because they're the only child in the family. And if you're the only child, all the expectation is on you, and that really stresses out the child. You can also say families with more children tend to be happier. And I put it in the reading, but it says scientists did a lot of research and they said, look, the perfect number of children to have is actually 3. So you can actually, through this motion, encourage families to be happier because they're going to have a bigger, happier family. Now, you can also say having more children will help solve aging population issue, like who's going to pay for all these aging population to support? Who's going to pay for elderly welfare and their pensions and also their health insurance? If there's not enough people to go around, then obviously then you need to start cutting down on the welfare. So we do have a very serious problem about aging population, and this motion should help. Lastly, you can say having more people will boost the economy, because for any economy to grow, you do need people, and people are a very important part of economy to grow, because more people means more people will be working. Working population will grow, and working population will pay more taxes so that they will sustain the country. Now, if you think about it, I didn't put it as an argument here, but also the other part is that if you want to be fair, then yes, if, like, let's say if you're the three people, like if you have three children in the family, then you're actually contributing to the economy. Then it only makes sense that if you're only going to contribute to the economy by having one child or no child, then you should contribute more by paying taxes to the government. Let's look at the argument of the con side. Well, obviously here you can say it's going to really harm the family, country, as well as the society. The first argument I can think of is that children can grow up happy regardless of having a sibling. So it really goes against the first argument. But yes, you're not going to look at the only child and say this child is problematic or this child is going to be a bully. Now, there are some pros and cons of having one child or many childs, but there are definite pros of being an only child. So you can't really say that having two or more children is the only solution. And also, very importantly, you can say, look, it's a free country. Families should have a choice. And a government cannot say to a family that, look, you're not contributing enough, so you must have a lot of children or we're going to charge you a lot. So that's really against the value of freedom. You can also say having many children can be financially burdensome. So yes, it may be true that families can be happy having a lot of children, but who's going to pay for all their education? Who's going to pay for all the universities? Because now we know that the universities are getting more and more expensive. These days, parents also want their children to succeed. So they invest on their children a lot in the education, especially in private education. Now, back in the days of farming, for example, you don't need to have private education, because if you learn, then you can be a good farmer. But the society is changing. A lot of families want the best for their children, and that's why having many children can be financially burdensome. Lastly, you can say, look, advancement in technology does not require a big population. Now, in next 20 to 30 years, we're not even going to see a lot of waiters, for example, like in a restaurant in South Korea, they completely got rid of the waiters, and then robots are taking the order for the customers. So, and also you see in McDonald's, people do not line up for the cashier, but they order all the food by the kiosk. So advancement in technology does not require a big population, but few who can really be benefiting the society through breakthroughs in technology. And lastly, I didn't put the argument here, but if you enforce this, then you're actually going to have even more people who wants to leave the country because they don't want to get taxed. So it might actually exacerbate, meaning it will worsen the problem of population because people don't want to live in that country anymore. But okay, so those were some of the things I actually thought about in a pro and con side argument. So my suggestion is do read up and become prepared. And until then, I'll see you